why you won't get to the next level. That was the subject of an email I received from my mentor several years ago. Why you won't get to the next level. I remember seeing that subject and getting a little bit upset about it. What kind of an email is this? Is this guy trying to curse me or something? I opened the email and his opening line was, "Don't worry, I'm not trying to curse you, nor do I mean to come across as being offensive, but here's my thought." He goes on to explain the importance of building capacity for us to get to that next level that we desire to get to. The very next day, I get another email from my mentor, this time detailing how the email he sent the previous day probably rubbed some people in the wrong way, and how this particular dude on his mailing list unsubscribed from his list and deleted the email without reading it because of how upset he was by the subject, and then goes on to send a DM to my mentor on Twitter explaining his actions. Now, there will be valid reasons to support or be against the actions this guy took, but my lesson in that entire drama was this: self-honesty. That if we are going to move our lives to a whole new level, we have to learn to be honest with ourselves. Because here's the thing, integrity is not about being perfect, it's about being perfectly honest with yourself. And if we can't be honest with ourselves, then how can we be honest with other people? And one thing that scares us, that makes us run away from self-honesty, is those answers that we'll find when we ask ourselves those sincere, difficult and hard questions. Now, that's what scares us from self-honesty. But at the end of the day, this is one thing that high performers do. They know how to ask themselves those very difficult, hard, but sincere and very necessary questions so that they can course correct and take those actions that move their lives to a whole new level. They are able to do this because they've learned how not to take things personally. They've learned how to put their ego aside, how to put their emotions and feelings aside, so that they can look objectively and take those steps and those actions that they need to take so that they can perform at that very high level. Now, that's the challenge that we have, our emotions and our feelings. I remember this Star Trek quote that says that insults are only effective where emotion is present. Now, this is not to say that we should go about living our lives suppressing our emotions. That's definitely no way to live. Because here's the thing, emotions are good, our feelings are good, they are great, they are wonderful, because they serve as a pointer and as a proof of something that we probably need to change in our lives. Now, that's the goal, that's the idea, that we don't react based on our emotions, we respond. We respond by crafting and creating a positive step, a positive action that we need to take to move our lives to a whole new level. Now, that's what this episode is about. It's about asking ourselves those very difficult and hard but sincere and necessary questions that we need to ask so that we can achieve those life-changing goals that we want to achieve. And one of those very difficult but sincere questions that I believe that we need to ask is this: what could possibly stand in my way from achieving this goal that I want to achieve, from being that high performer that God has created me to be? And the answer to that particular question, I believe, is these two things: fear and distractions. Now, in a previous episode, I've talked about fear and the importance of having courage to being those high performers that God has created us to be. In this particular episode, I want to zero in on distraction and how we can protect our focus so that we can take our lives to a whole new level. Because here's the thing, distraction is the great destroyer of dreams, goals, and visions. To the extent that someone said that distraction is the most corrosive disease of the 20th century. That's why we need to avoid distraction. That's why we need to protect our focus. Because distraction is what causes people to procrastinate and not go after those goals, go after those life-changing goals that they want to achieve. It's also distraction that causes that After people have begun well, after they have started their journey, they've started their journey well, somewhere along the line, they throw in the towel, they give up and don't see that particular goal or project to the end. So at the end of the day, what happens is that you have these great finishers great starters, who are poor finishers. You have these people who start well, but at the end of the day have so many abandoned, half-baked projects in their lives. I like the way someone put it. I can't quite remember his name anymore. He said that our natural human tendency is distraction and dissipation. We start this particular goal, we start this particular task, then end up being seduced by this other option. We tend to drift, move away from that which is difficult and that which we know to be true to something that is comfortable and something that is socially condoned. Now, isn't that the story of the lives of so many of us? How we tend to drift, how we tend to vacillate, move from one thing to another. We start something and then we get seduced, we get tempted, we get pulled away by that shiny new thing that appears, that shiny new option, that new trend, that new pop culture, that new popular phenomenon. And so at the end of the day, we can't say that this is one thing that we started and we saw through to the end. And this is why protecting our focus is so important. Now, protecting my focus, this was how I prepared for, ran and finished the 2020 Lagos City Marathon. Protecting my focus is how I'm able to bring this No Excuses video series your way. This is episode 50 of the series, and I wouldn't have been able to do this if I didn't protect my focus, even if I didn't guard myself from the distractions that were going all around me. And that's just the beautiful thing, that I'm able to share my experience with you from preparing for running and actually finishing the Lagos City Marathon because of this trait of protecting our focus, of protecting my focus. And that's why I believe that even if you forget anything in this No Excuses video series, please do not forget this. Overcoming fear and distraction, protecting our focus, and having courage are two key elements if we are going to be those high performers that God has created us to be. Now, to the most important question, how do we protect our focus? Number one, by making fewer decisions. Here's what I mean. The more decisions that we make, the more our brain gets fatigued, and the less effective we become over the long run. So what do? Have an agenda. Don't be that person who goes online, who turns on the TV, who goes to that place, who goes to see that person and doesn't have an agenda. At the end of the day, what you discover is that we're just browsing. Anything that comes our way, we just accept it. And the interesting thing is that while we feel that we're not doing anything while browsing, the truth is that our brain is actively engaged. It's trying to make a decision to focus or not to focus. And at the end of the day, I assure you that can really be tiring. So what do? Have an agenda. Get online with an agenda. Go to that place with that agenda. Once that agenda has been achieved or fulfilled, pull out immediately. Number two way to protect our focus is by making fewer decisions earlier. Now, what this simply means is that have an agenda, but have a planned out agenda. Now, someone will say it's an agenda, not a plan. Yes, it's a plan, but have it planned out. What this simply means is that have your agenda written out. Plan ahead. Plan a week ahead. Plan a month ahead. Plan a year ahead. Don't let it that day come and then be wondering, what was my agenda again? So that when that day comes, you already know what your agenda is. As simple as what to wear, what to eat. Plan it ahead. I know somebody may say, isn't that boring? Doesn't that make life boring? But here's the thing. Life is boring when you don't achieve those life-changing goals, those life-altering goals that you know you should be achieving. So if you know that those things are important to you and those things matter to you, then take out time to plan out other easier things like eating and the clothes to wear, so that you have enough energy, you have enough strength to focus on those things that really matter. Number 3 way that we protect our focus is by defining our mission. I like the way Mike Mudo puts it. He says, you can't find until you define. Now, you can't find focus until you define what your mission is. Now, the goal is that to ask ourselves, what is that thing that I desire? What do I want to be achieved now? What should I be focusing now at this stage of my life? It's when we can determine what that thing is that we can then plan out the steps that we need to take, and then say to ourselves that, look, these are the things that really matter, and I should minimize time spent on anything else. And the number 4 way that we protect our focus is by saying no. Just say no to those things that you know want to take you away from achieving those goals you want to achieve. I like the way my mentor puts it. He says that don't be sentimental, be sensitive to your destiny. If we are sincere with ourselves, many of those things that are just going on around us are just sentiments. And we have to learn how to say no to those things that are sentimental, so that we can say yes to our destiny. We can say yes to those things that matter. We can say yes to being those high performers that God has created us to be. To live a life of no excuses, a life where we go on to exceed limits, break barriers, crush our goals, and become a pleasant surprise to not just those people around us, but to ourselves. It's helpful to remember that being our very best, being effective, is all about concentration and disregarding distractions, whether positive or negative. It's helpful to remember that art is all about capturing attention in the midst of distractions. And then finally, it's helpful to remember that by prevailing over obstacles and distractions, one may unfailingly arrive at a desired goal or destination.